I sensed a bit of that when you talked about acoustic materials. Oh, if you have a problem with too much bass in your studio, the answer is buy this foam. And that's the solution, right?
Yeah.
And then you showed all of these other architectural solutions in your presentation. And one of the ones that struck me the most was the art gallery in Richmond, Virginia, where it was primarily an open room, and they had changed the angle on one of the long walls, a few of them. So it has a bit of a shingle-like effect or scaling-like effect.
Yeah.
Opened up the roof so that exposed the wood, and then the minutia of one of the techniques blew my mind, and I would love to explore that a little bit more with you. And that was the sandblasting of the wooden beams in the roof structure to expose the porosity of it. And you had mentioned that. Do I have a? No, I don't. It's okay. But the point is, you had talked about the porosity being one of those things that led to it, and I wondered about the scale of that, because I have had conversations where an instrument maker will make a high gloss finish, which is typically hard and buffed down, and then they'll make what they call a semi-gloss finish from the same finish, but they're not buffing it. And they tell me, "Oh, you can't hear the difference," and I say, "Oh, that's not true. For me, I get more high end and a faster response on the gloss finish than I do on the semi-gloss finish," and they think I'm nuts. But it's effectively that porosity that you're talking about. When we don't buff the finish, now we don't have the sound coming at it, but there's something happening there. So I'm going to shut up on that for a second and tell me, am I nuts? Tell me how scalable is this idea of porosity with acoustics, and how perceivable is it on the scales?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I want to mention that that idea of resolving complexity is a big driver in this work. And there are a lot of ways you can approach acoustics. And the one that I was immersed in, I think, had a lot to do with learning the techniques, the tools, how do we measure rooms and analyze them and write reports. And I think that what that was always missing for me was a stronger connection to the architects and to the building owners, because as an expert in a field related to architecture, what the field has always said is you should hire us for your project, essentially, and get us involved, and we will help guide you. And that's a perfectly good way to get a good sounding building. But most architecture doesn't quite work that way. Most projects do not hire acousticians. Most projects don't have the money or the will to do that. And so I was always searching for this, like, what kind of language can we have? Can we develop or use that allows us to bring to the architects and to the building owners an understanding of this stuff so that they can make informed decisions about it. So if you were to spend a week shadowing a typical acoustics consultant, you would find that it's a totally different world. The language they use, the tools they use, is very complex. But I want to be able to talk to an architect for 10 minutes and have them leave with a better intuition about how our buildings sound and why, so that they can take that with them. And I think so if we get into something like a porosity, there is a very real physical limitation as to, let's say, what the porosity of something like brick or like wood can do, because there's a limitation to its scale. Sound is very large scale, and you need deep systems to really influence all of the frequencies that matter to us. So I wouldn't say that you can make sure that the porosity of wood is exposed and that you'll never have to reach for an engineered acoustic panel ever again. Yeah. But in this particular case, the gallery in Richmond, David Morrison and Claire Accardo were the owners of it. They just had a real interest in architecture and the senses, and They come from the visual art world. They were very interested in the sonic world, and it led to a lot of interesting discussions about what an art gallery is, what it needs to be acoustically and visually, and how those things might overlap. And so something as simple as making sure the wood is exposed and not sealed so that it can do everything it can became an important part of the design of that. And that means that the way I look at it is that if we understand the materials that we make our spaces out of, and we understand how those materials can be shaped and how that shape influences sound, and by shaping, I can mean a fine porosity, then we can start thinking of the room as a whole and not necessarily, and reducing our reliance on additive solutions. Let's put it that way. Because you could certainly just look at a room like that and go, well, nothing in here is absorbing a lot. Let's pile up some acoustic panels. We'll calculate the square footage and we'll make sure that they're 2 or 4 inches deep or whatever, and we'll get enough in there so that we hit a reverberation target and we're good. That's a way you can absolutely do acoustics that way. But I think what we were aiming for is that because there was such a strong visual component to it, they wanted to minimize that kind of intervention. And so we started to ask, what can we do with what we have? The floor, you can't really change the floor. It's glossy, it's flat. What can we do to the walls that keeps them visually simple but helps the room acoustically? What can we do with the wood structure? What happens at the front of the room where a curtain might be brought in? And there was a little bit of let's do everything we can and see how it goes, and you should be prepared because maybe you'll need to add acoustic panels in the end. And in the end they didn't. They actually liked it. And it's a bit reverberant. It's something you said earlier about trying not to define too quickly what is good and what is bad. We have absolutely standards. What is the right reverberation time for a podcast? I like to push those boundaries a little bit. Those standards come from somewhere and they make sense for the use of it. But I think they are also limiting, and I don't see the spectrum of reverberation possibility as being good to bad. And I don't see the different uses as always pointing to the same reverberation time. When we think about the project in Richmond, there's a very particular, intelligent, engaged client. They needed to know what the trade-offs were because they wanted to end up with the space that they ultimately dreamed of, not the space that came out of an acoustics book and met the right standards. And so can that space be a bit more reverberant than a typical acoustician was like? Absolutely. But can we get away without using acoustic panels in that case? Yeah, in that case, we could. It all seemed to come together nicely.
Thank you for watching and listening. You can find more episodes wherever you listen to your podcasts. And a special thanks to those who support us on Patreon. It's your support that enables us to do this work.